Well, welcome back to the table, friends. We are so excited to have Amy Fritz here with us. We met Amy on Facebook in the Christian Podcast Association and then met her in person recently at Podcast Movement, which what a good time that was. And like getting to meet people that you've only seen like their picture or like comments through a Facebook group, and then you come together and you're like, man, these are my people.
That's right.
We are so happy to have you here today.
Thank you. I am thrilled to be here. You know, some of the magic when you become a person that has a microphone, you're like, oh, people think it's a thing when they're like, this is going to happen to you guys. Melissa, someday you're going to show up at Podcast Movement. People could be like, I listened to your podcast. I interacted with you online. And it's so fun to see you. And then you'd be like, oh, but I'm a normal person. Maybe these other people are just normal people too that happened to turn a microphone on and had the audacity to hit record.
Yeah.
And like thought somebody would care what they had to say.
Yeah.
Some of us hide behind interviews more than others, but it's just fun. I was worried as I was getting closer to the event. I was like, oh yeah, I'm an introvert. I just realized that. I just remembered that. I just remembered it's a big event with a lot of people. And what if I just want to hang out in my room? But like, it ended up being great. Like there's plenty of opportunities to like go sit in a corner.
So.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciated so much Eric opening up his home, to have the rest of the Christian Podcast Association come over and have dinner and everything. And that was actually the first time we got to meet you, was at that dinner. And I love that time because we all just kind of sat around and everyone shared what their podcasts were about and what they were doing. And it was just so encouraging to have so many people that were all doing it kind of for the same reason, but we're all doing drastically different things. And so I really enjoyed that time.
I love that about the Christian Podcaster Association and about Eric Nevins. He has created this really awesome community that I feel like is pretty unique. I mean, it is easy to like create a group, especially if it's around some sort of faith related thing, that can turn into something really like very specifically about a particular theology or a particular like these are the rules of like what it means.
Yeah, you could get like really fundamental with it,
right? Yeah. And I just love that he has avoided that. He's like, you know what, we love Jesus. We're all doing different things. We probably don't all even agree with each other on all our things, but it's, you know, I'm not going to say you have to check off any of these other boxes in order to be here. And I really think there's some beauty in that community of being like, oh, I am in a group with people that I maybe wouldn't necessarily be anywhere else, but because we share a common faith and we haven't self-selected into like, well, I'm in this denomination, so I'm only in this group. Like we're all together.
Yeah.
And so we have to reckon with the idea that like, maybe Amanda isn't crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't, because I've seen her. I saw her at Eric's barbecue. I sat, you know, with these people, and having like conversation and community with people reminds you that the thing that is most important are these like the non-negotiables, like the creeds that we, you know, hold to, like, you know, Jesus died for our sins. All the other stuff we can have a conversation about. I like to say that, like, I can have an interesting conversation about other things and not necessarily consider it a disqualifier for being my friend. I may think there's like really big ramifications for some of these things, but I in my old age now, my 40s, late 40s-ish, I'm like, I'm not as worried about who's checking off all the boxes, right? Like, I'm gonna let Jesus figure that out.
Yeah, exactly.
I think he will. I think he will. But like being in a group like that, I think Erica's really like cultivated that. Like, no, we're not about like you're out and those people are crazy, right?
Yeah. So something we talked about, and you said this, and it stuck with me. It was like the last day that we talked at Podcast Movement, and it was. It's funny to think that when we were in high school, and you and I are very similar in age, this thing called podcasting wasn't one of the options on our what are you going to do when you grow up?
That's right. I did say that.
Yeah. And so let me ask you, why podcasting? Like, how did that come about for you?
Well, I've always loved words. And, the thing used to always be like, get a blog spot. Like if you're born in the late 70s, you know what Blogspot is, because when you were a young mother, everybody was sharing all of their personal information about all their children and everything they did before we were like, oh, wait, maybe we don't share everything. Like we're like like, so it used to be like blogs, it used to be like just writing words. And then at a certain point, I like sort of censored myself, because the thing that I really felt passionate about was like things that were sort of broken in our Christian communities. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about spiritual abuse, but like I realized it was a little too personal, and it was like hitting too close to home, and it might cost too much for me to talk about it, like cost my husband's income. And so I just sort of was quiet. And then when I was ready to find my voice and found my voice, I like literally was like, I can use my actual voice. Podcasting is a thing, and this could be fun. I could maybe do this. I could figure this out. Like everything, there's a YouTube video to explain everything online.
Yeah, exactly.
And like there's free editing software. I had a microphone already that we happened to have got for like really cheap from somebody's estate sale. I'm married to a really technical person, so I could like, bully him into helping me with anything I need. And I'd seen other people do it. I think there's something that like you look around, you're like, well, they did it. I should probably be able to figure it out. So I decided to use my voice, and it was like vulnerable and also really empowering at the same time to be like, I'm saying words. I'm on this side, and people are hearing me in their ears. Like, it's vulnerable and really personal. And I have to say, I've hidden too much behind interviews, but I've found that people resonate mostly with episodes. And I'm going to tell you guys this as well. People that listen to your podcast, they may be like, oh, that's an interesting guest. I'll press play, or I'll download this episode. But really the ones that are coming back over and over again are because, Melissa, they like you, Melissa. They like you, Amanda. They want to know what you are thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the more I have found I've brought myself to an episode, the more people resonate with it.
Yeah.
And you can't like just, it needs to be authentic. It can't be this like, I'm going to like set the mood and make them cry, like to manipulate their emotions. Like, sometimes I will get choked up in the middle of an interview, but it wasn't because I wanted to like play with my listeners' emotions. It was because that was what was happening in that moment. Yeah. And you can let people in on that. There's just something really powerful about it. And so, that's my like long story, medium summarized. It's not super short, not super long, but I don't know. Does that resonate with you guys with like
absolutely.
Sharing your stories?
And like that's kind of how we started. We started off.
We started
an accidental podcast. These are the accidental podcast.
Accidental podcast.
We started off like really purposing to have a Bible study, and then that kind of accidentally turned into a podcast. And then as our time at our church, changed and everything, we kind of found ourselves deconstructing, and that's we shared our deconstruction and then our reconstruction, and that kind of is what led us to, we feel like, doing interviews now through Tablecast, as we started Asha Media and all of those things that developed naturally. And so doing interviews is a natural part of it, because Tablecast kind of evolved into Asha's podcast. But then realizing like we needed to go back to our story, because we definitely left things on the table when we were deconstructing that we either weren't ready to process yet, we weren't ready to talk about, we had just forgotten about, we had repressed all of those memories, or we were still in a place where we were trying to protect people who didn't need protecting. And so we really felt like we needed to go back and we needed to tell that story in a way that would do that story justice and
Yeah.
and help people be that voice for the people that we know. We listen to podcasts that helped us. Your podcast was one of them. Your episodes about your experience with the Dave Ramsey solutions and all of that really helped us be able to process some things. And so we wanted to be that voice for other people also.
Yeah. There's that really powerful thing of like, you hear somebody working through something and you're like, yes, that makes so much sense to me. I think the tricky thing is finding the timing of like when to talk about the things in a way that is going to be helpful and healing and not just trauma dumping and like that you won't regret later or burn bridges that you don't want to have
burned. Or coming off as like two old biddies who are just sitting there complaining about their time and and
how to be honest about it, but like appropriately honest. Like how much do you share? Like oftentimes, like I started out sharing some people's stories early on in my podcast, but I'd made a very specific decision that they wouldn't necessarily be super raw, super fresh, like just happened in real time. And that we weren't like saying the names of bad guys, because sometimes that can be distracting. I don't know if you have noticed that, like, if you name the other people, I mean, I think it's different when you're dealing with a celebrity. I'm special. My story's special.
Well, no, but any of the podcasts with celebrity type people in them now, like that's the vision that I have of that person. And you know, that it just doesn't serve a purpose when it comes to smaller people in a sense.
Yeah. And so I found like, I don't need to say the name of that pastor or that church, that because people will then they'll be distracted from your story. They're going to go Google the church. They're going to go Google the pastor.
The people, exactly.
They'll figure it out anyways, honestly, even if you don't say.
I want them to have to click 3 times, not one.
There are ways we know. If you have that little Nancy Drew in you, which we probably all do, I do. I can figure out just about anything very quickly, which is how I got myself into the whole mess I'm in right now. Anyways, so, but like, the timing and how much to share, it is like, we could have a whole series of conversations about how to do that. And like, how much therapy do you need before you have the conversation?
That's something we just recorded an episode for Patreon, and we said like between what the two of us have spent on therapy, we could have bought a very modest home.
I'm saying.
I mean, it was, I mean, we're talking.
I recently had like, I called my therapist. I was like, can I get it? I know I'm not on the schedule now, but I'm having a problem.
Yep.
Please help. Please help me. But how do we not put that burden on our listeners, right? Where they're like, oh my word, this is too much. Amanda needs to call her therapist.
Yeah. And we decided, and that's actually happened. Like we've tried to record, we wanted our new podcast to come out sooner, but it took us, like, things come up and you go, okay, I have to deal with that before we can even talk about it. Or we think we're okay. And then we start recording and we listen and we're like, yeah, you're not okay. So, I mean, we've had to do that, but,
Melissa mentioned something and it triggered something in me, and I reacted in a very like
not so okay way.
Not okay way. And so then, like, the next time I talk to my therapist, they always start like, "How was your week? What do you want to talk about?" And I'm like, I had a trauma response, and we need to discuss that because that was not okay."
Our Venn diagram of podcasting here, we have a lot of overlap in like talking about hard faith things.
Yeah.
And so if people are listening, especially if you're thinking about telling your story, or telling someone else's, there's a whole lot that goes into it. And, is there anybody that wonders? We're not okay. We're hoping to be okay. And I think this world of like sharing stories like this is kind of new. And I think we are learning as we go, and hopefully what we do is we learn to honor people as well as we can in the storytelling. And not like be like, oh, someone has a story, let me bring them on and trot them out for the world to hear when they are not even ready.
Yeah.
They're not in a position of being able to handle it, because we know, like, when you tell your story, people will start reach out to you. They'll start messaging you.
Yeah.
For better or worse.
Yeah.
Are you ready for that?
Coming as a comment.
Right?
Yeah. And I mean,
it may be an Instagram comment. It might be something else. Yeah.
Yeah. There's been people we've reached out to of like, I love your story, and, if you would consider being on, and, and they've come back and been like, I don't know if I'm in a place to share that. And it's like, that's fine. That's totally fine. And, I think one of the biggest things for us is being able to tell it in a way that can bring that healing, because otherwise, like, what's the purpose of telling a story?
Yeah.
If you're not doing it in order to help someone else, like,
I don't want to tell just a salacious story that's like, here are all the bad things that happened. I want to think about, what are the themes? Like, what are we learned? What are the sense-making things that have happened along the way? What are red flags you saw? What did you learn about high control situations that have helped you now? How can you provide like empathy for your past self? For being like, how did I end up in this situation? Well, how did you? Because of the way God created our subconscious to want to protect ourselves and to not want to see bad things about places that bring us some level of safety and security and connection.
Yeah.
That's why.
I was saying that once I was ready to realize, because the concept is quite simple, that I am the common denominator in all of the events in my life, and I should probably deal with my part of that. It's only then that I was able to take the steps that I needed to heal, and my life has done a complete, flip-flop, and things that I thought were normal and toxic and struggle situations that were just always constantly there, to where I could be like, man, this is my life and it just sucks and it's full of struggle. It's funny how when I healed those things, those type of events, they don't exist like they were. And even if things come up, they're now handled in such a healthy way, they don't become dysfunctional.
Right. And so, it can be easy to look back and do that. Okay, we're church ladies, right? We're good. We're Jesus people. We understand we have a sin nature. We understand on some of our best days that we are not blameless in all the situations that we have been felt harmed in. But like figuring out how to handle the two things being true at the same time.
Yeah.
I have like screwed up so badly in so many ways. However, that does not mean that I'm not worthy of being treated with kindness. Yeah. That does not mean that it is okay for it's somebody in spiritual like authority over me to use that authority in a way that is coercive or harmful. So, I don't know if that resonates with you guys, but like having to hold both of those things and like wanting to be honest about things, but not shaming yourself and not shaming others. It's a hard thing. It's really hard to handle. And if you figure it out, let me know.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a big challenge. And I think, you do the best with it that you can at the time. And as you learn better, you do better. But
yeah.
What do you think has been like your biggest challenge in podcasting?
Oh man, I'm an Enneagram 2. I care a whole lot about what people think. I want people to love me. I don't want you to just like me. I want you to like adore me. A really special love. And having what I talk about like things that are hard in faith world. A super personal thing. And what is really hard personally is a lot of people that listen to me have opinions about where I should land emotionally and theologically. And they are not afraid to tell me as such. I put an Instagram post out about helping with Vacation Bible School and being like tearing up over listening to kids singing about Jesus and saying, no, and I said, it doesn't matter what I've seen in the world and how many broken things I've seen in churches. It still makes me cry to hear kids singing to Jesus. Somebody commented like, oh yeah, I would cry too, those kids being gaslit. I'm like, No, like, let us not put our trauma, project that onto these kids. Like, they're not being gaslit at VBS. They're
like,
not.
let's not go completely the opposite direction now because,
right.
you know,
and other people
one
are like,
flavor of ice cream was wrong, the other, all of them are wrong, you know?
Right. And labeling everything, it's really easy to label everything as abusive, everything as narcissistic. You know, people really want me to make statements about this, that, or the other thing and have like taken, pulled their support because I haven't. Yeah. And that's really hard. The other thing that's really hard is just knowing that talking about this sort of thing does not make a local pastor rejoice when I join their church.
Oh, I so
nobody's like, I should have warned you all of this. If I could go back in time and see, like, Amanda, Melissa, just want you to know, when you do a podcast, sometimes people listen. Sometimes people in your community listen. And so, like, I walk into a church, does the pastor go, oh, yay, let's throw a party? Like, or do they go, oh, no?
Oh, no, I just had that thought.
No.
Like, over the weekend, I was like, man, nobody's going to want me to go to their church because they're going to be like, this woman wants to tear the place down. No, I don't. I'm just going to call you out on your crap. Sorry.
I don't know if you heard me say, I put it out somewhere or maybe talked about it on one of my podcasts. I don't assume you've listened to every one of my podcasts, by the way. But I've talked to Bob Smetana, religion journalist, whom I love.
Yes.
He's just been in the business forever. And he's just really good at what he does. At one point, he tells a story about at one point he was going to this church. Their family was living in Franklin, Tennessee, like the evangelical epicenter of the world. The evangelical industrial complex is here. And Bob, being a religion journalist, introduces himself to the pastor and says, please don't do anything stupid. Listener, note for the audio. This pastor did end up doing something stupid, and it was a whole thing. But like, I feel that way. I feel that strongly. But I also want to say to people in my real life, like, I'm not just waiting to do a podcast about you. Like, I do not want to do that. In fact, I am going to be really, really reticent to put like personal in real time things out there. Yeah. If people have listened, I haven't talked about the church we left a couple years ago. Haven't mentioned it. I talked about the plagiarizing pastor from several churches ago who like acted out Mark Driscoll sermons every week because that was a little more egregious. There's a little more space in between, and it's been in the Washington Post. Yeah. So I feel like but like it is hard. Like on Sunday, I was like, okay, I'm going to read scripture, and I cry when I read scripture sometimes now because I'm an old woman who's seen things, and it just makes me more emotional. And I was sitting in the lobby beforehand. The pastor comes up, and I was like, hey, I'm reading scripture today. And I'm like, I'm feeling a little weepy. I'm like, if you could just be a jerk, it would be easy. This would make it, I won't cry. And he's like, he looks at me like, I don't think Amy Fritz wants her pastor to be a jerk. It's a trap. It's a trap. He didn't say it's a trap, but I was thinking that. But he's like, I know you. You don't want me to be a jerk. But like, it can be hard in real life. It is hard. The survivor community is full of really hurting, not healed all the way, highly activated people that are bumping into each other inadvertently and hurting each other. Mm-hmm. And I've said and done stupid things myself, and it can be very, very painful, and it can be very, very lonely. And so I'm actually in a position of like rethinking how I do my podcast, just because it is so, so personal, and it has taken a heavy toll on me, actually. Yeah. On my life, my faith, my like, in some ways I feel like a commodity that's being consumed. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the beautiful things about podcasting is how personal it can be, but it also can feel like too much.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that resonates well.
Yeah, we learned that too, of like when we, with this podcast, the way that it evolved and being okay with looking at it all the time and being like, where are we going? Where are we heading? And as long as we stick to the mission and vision that we established, and is that changing, or are we still holding to that? Is what we're doing still, are we still holding ourselves accountable to that? Then as it grew, we were very confident and comfortable in where it was going. Starting the second podcast, I feel like with this one, under our belt in a sense, and being a little bit more, further along in that process and doing this one on purpose, now knowing like, oh, that was good. That was actually a good decision that we made.
Yeah.
And then being willing to hold ourselves accountable too for this and say, okay, like there's going to be things, if we can't talk about them, we don't talk about them, and see where this goes. Just because I've listened to quite a few of your episodes, and your format you've done such an amazing job. And I think that you've handled subjects that could be handled wrong in a very good way. I would commend you on that. Like I listened to it and I was like, man, I want to be like this lady. Like I want to handle this.
I wonder what I edited out.
Yeah. Well, that's why we edit though. Because what you get sometimes, I do strange things, so we got to edit some things sometimes. But I would just honestly commend you and say that listening to it from a perspective of like, I'm going to do a podcast. It's very similar. We have a lot of the same topics that we talk about. I want to make sure that I handle it in a way that is appropriate. And I think you did that so well. And then, if you have to, lighten the load a little bit of that, I think that you'll handle that just as well as you've handled it up till this point, and it'll flow naturally with where you're at. Just because we've been through something and that's where we were at doesn't mean we have to stay there, I guess, is what.
Yeah. But like, if you talk about a certain subject, you're going to attract a certain listener.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
For better or worse.
Yeah.
And some of them will go along the journey with you, and some of them are going to not. And I guess that's one of the hard things about podcasting is being okay. Like, you know what? This is where I'm going, and I'm going to lose some listeners. Am I okay with that? And like, and it's not personal. I'm going to do my darndest not to take it personally, that not everybody is going to follow along.
No. But life's like that too. You have people in your life for a season or reason, or I think there's something
but it's
else.
so hard. It feels so personal, especially if you do like a Patreon or something, because why do they send me an email why do they notify me when somebody cancels? Like, I don't want a notification. I'd rather not know. I don't want to see the names. Part of me is like, what if I redid this and had somebody else in charge of the email list, the Patreon? I don't want to see who follows and unfollows me. Even like on Instagram, when someone follows you and you're like, well, I thought they already were following me.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
They must have unfollowed me.
I just read a Facebook post, like, how it'll show you like this time 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And you can either post that or not post it. I don't usually post them, but it showed me one, and I saw something on Facebook and I went to share it with somebody because it reminded me of them, and they were not in my friends list anymore. And I had no idea. And I was like,
and maybe they accidentally unfriended you. Maybe.
Yeah. They had unfriended me long before I thought of them and tried to send them something.
Yeah. How do we not take it personally? That's a struggle for me. I'm working through it. I think part of it is finding community. Well, if I can sit down and talk with other people doing it, that helps.
Yeah. And I think that's where the Christian Podcast Association has been so beneficial to us personally, is just like that. When you feel like you're alone, or you feel like you don't know what you're doing. And I can't tell you, I know you've gotten much more active in it, and you've taken on a different role within that group. But to be able to like be struggling with something, and then to be like, oh, Amy and Eric are going to go live and they're going to be talking about this exact thing. And it's just like, oh my gosh, that is such good timing. And you don't feel like you're alone, and you feel like you have this group of people who are supporting you and are your cheerleaders all over the country. And so can you kind of talk to us a little bit about just your role within that group, and kind of, what you and Eric are doing?
So this is the Christian Podcasters Association that was founded by Eric Nevins. He's amazing. what happened was I joined the Christian Podcasters Association Facebook group, I think because I put out on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or something, and it said, I was asking some question. They're like, hey, have you heard of this Christian Podcasters Association? They have a Facebook group. I was like, oh, actually, I think it was Laura Barringer. I'm going to name drop. Laura Barringer said, because I follow like 1 million people online. She just happened to see it at that moment. And I was like, I have never heard of this. I will go join. And so I joined. And Eric was just so kind. And he would and he even messaged me, was like, hey, if you need anything, let me know. And so at a certain point, I was like, oh, he has this gold group. I should join the gold group where they with sort of a mastermind, weekly meetings. And he was messaging me about something, and I said, I should probably join the group. I was like, I think I'm going to join it right now. And so because of that, I have like the spiritual gift of like bossiness, sort of. I think that's a spiritual gift. And
leadership.
So I like to start out a lot of conversations with Eric with, hey, you should.
I finally found my spiritual gift.
I have an idea. It was on some inventory I took, Melissa.
If that was on the list, I would have known this years ago.
And so at a certain, I was, and then, about a year ago, I think I was like, oh, I actually need to make some money. I have a kid going to college. I need to figure out something. And so I was like, hey, Eric, maybe I'll start a podcast about podcasting. And then I'm like, well, maybe I should just work for you. And he's like, let's talk about that. And so I started helping him with podcast tours where authors, reach out to Eric and say, hey, I want to be on a certain number of podcasts. So sometimes it's an author directly. Sometimes it's a publishing house that says, hey, we have some authors. We want you to help them get on podcasts. And so I was like, sure. So he paid me. I did some contract work for him, helping book people on podcasts. And then also over the summer, I took on a few more roles where I kind of help with the CPA Gold group. And then I help like with Instagram, sort of the social media stuff and some marketing. And it's really fun just to help people, get started with podcasting, solve some of their podcasting problems, to say, hey, is your host also confusing you about like how many downloads you have, and like keep changing the rules? Like, it's fun to have community. I love, like, one of my favorite things is to be able to work with other people. And so when you are an entrepreneur that is sitting in your house by yourself and you're not like getting that feedback all the time from people, it's really good to find a place of people that you can kind of consider to be your coworkers. Yeah. To like pull up your chair at the table and be like, hey, is anybody else experiencing XYZ? Yeah. Is this working? Is it not working? Has anybody figured out how to make money podcasting? Please tell me how.
Please tell me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to end our conversation today, if there's any of our listeners who are considering starting a podcast, what is your biggest piece of advice for them? Well,
first of all, join the Christian Podcasters Association Facebook group. For sure. That's my plug. It is absolutely free. It's not going to cost you anything. You're going to get a lot of support, and you can ask that very question to like the thousands of people in the group. So that's the first thing I would do. The other thing I would do is like I would just sit down and think through what you are passionate about. There are so many. The thing that I love about starting a podcast is that there are so many little things you get to think about to do. And so I would say give yourself a long runway to do it. Pick a date to have set for a goal of when you want to launch. Tell somebody, because then you have to do it. Mm-hmm. And then you just find a list somewhere that helps you, that says how to start a podcast. And there will be like a list of 20 things that you can do to get from like, I have an idea, to like, it is out in the world. And don't worry about not knowing anything, because you can figure it all out. But like, join a community of other people, Google it. You're going to find like a checklist that will walk you through the whole thing.
So my shameless plug is we actually have that checklist in this issue of Asha Media Magazine. So
I didn't know that, and here I am.
No, you had no.
No, that's okay. That's why we have to throw the shameless.
Yeah.
Shameless plugs.
Nothing wrong
so
with that. That's
fun.
why you're here. It's why you're listening.
When I started my podcast, I made a huge long list I compiled all the checklists that I find everywhere, and like anywhere that there was like not anything that had like a unique thing on that list, I added to the list. And I was like, okay, now this week I am going to come up with ideas for like artwork for like the cover photo, or I'm going to call my friend and schedule a time for her to take headshots. I am going to think about names of podcasts. I'm going to look them up and see if anybody else has used the name. And then if they aren't, I'm going to buy some domain names. I'm going to claim them on social media. Like, there are so many things you can do that aren't really complicated that can lead you down the road to like recording and editing and all the technical things. So I think it's fun.
Yeah. Well, Amy, thank you so much for joining us at the table today. And we are going to link Amy's show, which is Untangled Faith. We're going to link her in our show notes, as well as links on how to find the Christian Podcast Association.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me. Let's do this again sometime.
Yes. Thank you.